Hey guys, so this is our presentation titled Construction and Shelters. It's by Jessica Weber and me, Cole Kennedy. I hope you guys like it. So, temporary shelters play a major role in disaster response and recovery. They give people who have lost their homes a new physical space to feel safe in, but also give them a space to feel mentally and emotionally safe while they tackle the difficulties of rebuilding. So I actually have some experience with temporary sheltering. Whenever I was a volunteer with the American Red Cross, I actually volunteered at a temporary disaster shelter in Conway, Arkansas, during the Arkansas flooding recovery of 2019. So this is like a spectrum of temporary housing. So it begins with the disaster. And then right after the disaster, we have emergency shelter, then temporary shelter, and then temporary housing. And then at the end of the recovery, we could finally move into permanent housing. So here are some issues that need to be considered. So the shelters need to have access to utilities, things like water, electricity, bathrooms, things that are needed to have a great shelter. Also, you need to know how many people need to be housed, how many families, how many people are in each family, how many individuals. Does the design fit the local climate? So this is important because, if it's a tropical climate, you need air conditioning. If it's a cold climate, you need heating, you need generators to produce this electricity and heat or air. Can the design be adapted to challenges in the local climate? So are the walls thick enough? Are they able to block out the outside climate conditions, things like that? Can the design be recycled and reused? So a reusable or recyclable shelter can help more people, and it could cost the organization less money, and less money means that they could help more people also. How is hygiene maintained? So it's important to have things like soap, shampoo, toothpaste, toothbrushes, things of that nature in disaster shelters, so that hygiene could be maintained. Does this design provide both physical and mental / behavioral safety? So this is very important. So a lot of shelters have social workers, therapists on staff to deal with PTSD, and also I remember whenever I volunteered in a shelter after the flooding of Arkansas flooding, they actually had a woman that came in every day and read children's books to the kids. This was good for mental health for the children, and this is all very important stuff for a disaster shelter. Is the design easy to build and dismantle and store? So having a shelter that could easily be dismantled and used again at a later time is just good logistically, and also just it will really help to assist more people, and you'll be able to get it to areas where you wouldn't normally get to. Does the design take into account the cultural and socioeconomic norms of the area? So does the design fit the area? Is it is it a good design? Is it helpful for the disaster recovery? So some technical improvements. The technology of construction design and the materials which shelters are made out of have come a long way. engineers have been creative with what materials are used, everything from paper and tarps to inflatable structures and shipping containers. As the technology for the manipulation of materials becomes more advanced, we can create more shelters at a more affordable price point. All of these improvements open up the use of temporary shelters, not just to house those who lost their house or home to a disaster, but to be used by emergency managers as locations for communication and logistical organization during a disaster. So yes, this is very important. You need to use tents and disaster shelters to house ham radio operators, emergency communicators, and you also need an area to house donations and other supplies for logistical reasons. And some shelters even have an area for the media and things like that. So shelters are no longer just tents, but can be made out of many different materials and designed for a wide variety of environments. New designs for shelters which use less energy, require less infrastructure, and are easier to build are being developed. With improvements to with improvements in the technical builds, shelters are more adaptable from temporary housing to become permanent housing. Shelters are the combination of technological improvements in both design, materials, and energy management. So, inflatable structures. These can be used to cover a predetermined area. They can be anchored to the ground and made out of material that is weather resistant. Large temporary shelters can be used similar to a public building. Instead of having to come up with materials to build any small structures, a community could erect one of these and divide the inside up for use. So I actually came up with this idea just because I'm a huge space nerd, and a lot of the structures that they've designed for for the moon and Mars and things like that start out as inflatable structures and then are covered with concrete and soil and things to block out radiation. So inflatable structures are very versatile. They're easy to use and very helpful during disaster recovery. Alright, so the discussion board question. So temporary shelters are needed in almost all disaster scenarios. Many of these shelters not only house disaster victims, but the emergency management responders. Because they house both types of groups, there is a spectrum of these shelters being just for a small, spectrum of these shelters being used for just a small time, or the same structure transitioning to a permanent structure. Where on the spectrum do you think these shelters would be of most use? What type of material do you see as the most useful? Some material for all? Or so how would you accommodate different populations using temporary shelters? For example, families and disabled individuals.